Hi, this is Tony Kent, and this is another episode of Tony Kent Writes and Cross-Examines. Although I think we should call this episode Tony Kent Writes and Cross-Examines again, because we've got our first returning guest, who is today even hairier than he was last time. Last time, he was known as Alex Knight, because we were talking about his upcoming book, Hunted, which you have to buy. And I'm sure we'll touch on that again. But for today, he's Mason Cross, which is how I first met him. And we are here to talk about his Carter Blake series. And we'll get on to Hunted, of course, because there's a book to buy. But we're here to talk about the Carter Blake series, which I've said before, I'll say again, is one of my absolute favourite series that anyone is writing at the moment. So, Mason Cross, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, Tony. We've managed to get over our technical hitches, which is great.
We have. I think there is still a slight delay, so we'll avoid saying over and out and Roger and things like that, but we'll just try and not talk over each other. I think it's probably for the best.
It's a bit like in the 80s when you used to see them doing satellite broadcasts and sort of speaking to a correspondent in Hong Kong, and there was I'm just going to wait for that. So if you ask me any awkward questions, I'm just going to pretend there's a big delay and I can go away and Google something.
Yeah, just freeze this, just have the shot frozen, looking like this while you're doing this. So, as I said, I wanted to talk to you today, really. You're the first person that I've had back, because last time we spoke, we were talking about Hunted a lot. But as I've said, one of my favourite series of books at the moment are the Carter Blake series, which I started reading about 2 years ago. And I think I don't think The Presumed Dead was out by that point, but I think I did the first 4 in about a week. And then Presumed Dead took me a day because I couldn't put them down. So, they were your first published books, weren't they?
Yep. And I mean, first of all, thanks a lot. That's amazing to hear that particularly another writer likes the books that much. But yeah, that was the first book that came out was The Killing Season, which came out in 2014, and that was the one I'd probably spent longest on, just because I mean it's you know what it's like. Your first book, nobody's waiting for it, nobody's paying you for it, so it takes a while to. You can take a while to get the luxury of time to work on it. So that one I probably started way back in 2010, just before my second child was born, and it probably took about 2 years to write that one. And then just with the kind of schedules of publishing and so on, it took until 2014 till it actually came out. So by the time it was there on a bookshelf, it felt like something that was in the dim and distant past. So it was quite nice to sort of pick it up and sort of open a real book and find words that I actually made up inside it. It was quite a surreal experience, as I'm sure you know as well.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because your first book is so different. Everyone's first book, not necessarily so different to the rest of their books as a finished product, but as a thing to you. Your first book is so different to all of the rest of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the one you get the first time, the first experience of seeing it on a shelf. But as you say, it's also the one that you can, if you want, spend a lifetime playing about with.
Yeah. And I think some people do. I think there are probably millions or thousands of unpublished books that people just never get to a point where they think, right, it's good enough, I'm going to send it off to people, because they keep tweaking and tweaking. And that's something that is quite a tough lesson to learn, that at some point you've just got to step away from it. It's never going to be perfect, but it's going to be good enough to give to somebody and take some feedback and sort of work together on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's something, isn't it? If you look... certainly, I can only speak for myself. If I look at my books now, I've had 3 published. So I've got 3 sitting there in final, this is in the shop form. And if I look at any given page of any of them, I would still change 20% of it.
Well, I find that as well. I don't know if you do this, but when I do readings at author events, I will edit as I'm reading out, because I'll think, oh, that sentence is a bit clunky. I think I'm going to reword that. I'm going to take that out. Or, oh, there's a sweary bit there and there's a kid in the front row. So it's like sort of constantly evolving project, the book. It's never done. You kind of feel that to actually go to the book, because you would end up...
I think your reception is going off a little bit where you are, Mason. Can you hear me?
Sorry?
I think the reception was... I think we had a few moments of bad reception there, so I missed the last thing you said.
I can hear you now.
Okay. We missed the last thing you said, so I think I'm recording at this end, which means that if you tell us again.
Great, yeah. So where did you get up to?
We said about editing the books and avoiding the children in the swearing in front of the children in the bookshop.
Well, no, I was just saying. I mean, you end up sort of, it's a bit like George Lucas going back and changing all the Star Wars movies. So it's probably a good thing that you don't get to just go back and sort of change things wholesale. So I mean, you would never stop. So you've just got to reach a point where the book's done, and you've just got to move on to the next thing.
Well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Without going too much into other authors, but just for a moment, I know Joseph Knox has decided to completely rewrite, but have a substantial re-edit of Sleepwalkers, I think it was, wasn't it? His first one. Whereas I spoke to Mark Billion yesterday, who has just re-released his very first, Scaredy Cat, his first, Sleepyhead, isn't it? His first Tom Thorne book.
Sleepyhead, yeah.
He's just he's reissued it, and he told me he had the opportunity to re-edit that, and all he did was take out a bit of physical description. So it's interesting, different approaches that people take.
Yeah, and that's a sort of interesting difference, is taking things out as opposed to adding new things. And that I know Ridley Scott went back and recut Alien, and the director's cut, even though it's got an extra scene in it, is actually shorter because he tightened up a lot of the edit. So that's quite an interesting thing to do. But in general, I just think, if it's out there, it's done, and you will always go back and you will want to change some things, but it's never going to be perfect. At some point, you've just got to accept that the book is the book, and you've got to write the next one.
Keep telling the story. Don't keep going and retelling the story. So speaking of telling the story, and speaking of physical descriptions, Carter Blake. Carter Blake is unusual, I think, in if you don't mind me saying, in terms of heroes, because we all write. There's always, I keep saying this in a lot of interviews, there is the archetypal hero, and we're all kind of writing the same guy to an extent, and then it's a question of, can you make that person unique? And the one thing that Carter Blake, I think, is different on is you get most of your heroes that they're, apart from Jack Reacher, who is 6'5", and John Puller, who is Jack Reacher, apart from those two, everyone's 6'2" and sort of 210. Whereas Carter Blake is not. Carter Blake is more the kind of man that you wouldn't notice in the street, and that was intentional, wasn't it?
Yep, that was definitely intentional, because I was sort of, I mean, I love the Reacher books, and books where you've got this unstoppable action man. I was a huge fan of the Schwarzenegger movies in the 80s, the classic ones. But I always found it more interesting to read about people who weren't Supermen, who had a bit of vulnerability. And I knew when I was coming up with a series character, I wanted somebody that wasn't always going to be the toughest guy in the room, that was going to have to rely on his wits a little bit more. And I've really made a point of that in a lot of the books, is having him get the shit kicked out of him sometimes. And I just feel for the reader, that is sometimes a bit more interesting if you are actually worried for the safety of your hero. Nobody's really worried about John McClane in the later Die Hard movies compared to the original one, where he is kind of a normal guy, just into this crazy situation. So you do get the feel in that first Die Hard that he is just getting through this by the skin of his teeth, to an extent with Indiana Jones too. And
very much so.
That's always been much more fun to me, to look at a vulnerable hero who you think could slip up at any moment or lose the fight. And that's kind of where I wanted to go in that one. I still love the kind of superheroes, Superman obviously being the archetype, and the Reachers, and the sort of the Schwarzenegger characters, like I was saying. But for me, I found it easier to write somebody that you could worry about a little more as a reader.
I've never thought of the Die Hard ones, actually. That's a really good example. The first Die Hard, the whole point of it, I mean, I think even the way they advertised it at the time was they've got this ever so slightly podgy bloke, by Hollywood standards, from moonlighting, from a comedy TV show. And they stuck him in a situation, and he gets his shit knocked in, doesn't he, regularly by everybody.
It's an interesting series to look at, because the first couple of movies, he's playing John McClane.
Okay, I'm not sure if you're coming back, Mason. Have we lost you completely? Okay, bear with us. Hopefully we'll get him back in the next couple of seconds, and we won't have to stop the recording.
See you again.
I can hear you. let's see if we can get you on here.
Okay, you froze
visually.
about halfway through the sort of Die Hard bit, I think.
Yeah. No, I know where I lost you. So
Okay.
if we can get your face back.
That's really the sort of least important part. Yeah.
Well, let's carry on talking while we try to get your face back.
Okay.
So yeah, where we stopped off, you said it was very interesting. In the first 2 or 3 of them, he's playing John McClane.
Yeah, and then after that, he's playing Bruce Willis, and the quality of the movies drops commensurately. So it's and it just shows that it's much more interesting looking at that normal guy thrown into insane situation that he has to deal with, and just get through things by the seat of his pants.
No, absolutely, and it's just not the same series. It's got the same title, but it's not the same series at all. And then in the final one, his son's a superhero as well, played by the ever charisma-free Jay Courtney, isn't it? Have I lost you?
But yeah, the last one is just sacrilegious.
It is. I mean, I think we've strayed onto film, which I think is very common when it's you and I talking. So we've got 4 minutes left. Whether we get you visually back or not, we've got 4 minutes left. So let's talk about Carter Blake. Come on, tell me a bit more.
Yes. So
in terms of where he came from, of course, because he's Sorry, I'll just spoke across you. Just in terms of where he came from.
Yeah. So you mean as how I came up with him as a character, or
yeah.
So I knew sitting down. I actually had an advantage because I knew I wanted to write a series character. I think a lot of debut authors get themselves into a corner by writing what is essentially a standalone book and then having to develop the protagonist into a series character. I knew before I even came up with the plot for Killing Season that I wanted this to be a series. So I tried to make life easy for myself by creating a character who could be dropped into different situations and moved around without having to explain it too much. So I knew I wanted him to be freelance. I knew I wanted him to be a bit of a mystery, and that was because I like reading about characters who reveal themselves slowly, but also because it made life easier for me because I didn't have to know this huge backstory before I started chapter 1, and I could learn about Blake along with the reader. So it starts off with that first line. The first thing you should know about me is my name is not Carter Blake, and then the reader doesn't know anything about him. Other than he is this person with a sort of murky military past, and some sort of memories that occasionally resurface, and that sort of throws up some questions in the first book. But you know enough about him in the first book to enjoy that plot. But as you work through the series, you learn more and more about him, and that's been fun for me and hopefully fun for the reader too.
No, I mean it is. I understand that as well. I did the same as you. I started out with the full intentions part of me of writing a series. It just wasn't a series about Michael Devlin. It was a series about Joe Dempsey. And then my publishers took it in a different direction. Although I've now with Power Play dragged Dempsey back in and trying to shift the focus back to the man I wanted to be the main character in the first place. But you should go back to your opening sentence of the entire series. First thing you should know about me is my name is not Carter Blake. And isn't it something after that? There's no more belongs to me than the motel room I'm staying in, and it's just a fantastic way, just an incredibly fantastic way to introduce a character. I was literally, from the moment I read that, literally is probably the wrong word, figuratively hooked from the moment I heard just those 2 lines. I mean, it's just such a good opener. How did you come up with that?
Well, actually, I had that opening line for years before I had the book, and I don't know where it came from, but I just thought that'd be a good opening line for a story or a book, and I just kind of saved it. And then when I was developing this book, originally chapter 1 is what chapter 1 was before in the published book, but I added the prologue after I'd written pretty much the whole book. Because I wanted to start the story with Blake, so we've got that page or 2 pages starting with Blake, and I remembered this line that I had from God knows how long, that gets down in a little notebook saying, the first thing you should know about me is my name is not, and I can't remember what the original name and the idea was, but I thought that's a good opening line for Blake. It's a good kind of mission statement, is that you don't know anything about me, and let's find out a bit more.
And it's ironic because now we can say, the first thing you don't need to know about me is my name is no longer Mason Cross. It's now Alex Knight. Mason, I'm going to have to cut us off there because we're literally about to hit 15 minutes, pardon me, and we don't get onto Instagram if we go beyond that. So thank you very much. Well, everyone who's out there, you need to read this series, and we will see you again at some point soon, I'm sure.
Thanks very much, Tony.
Cheers. Bye.
Good to talk to you.
And you.